Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, again, wherever you're joining us, we just want to say welcome. Whether that's Florida, Idaho, California, wherever it is, we just want to say thank you. This has been such a fun journey, especially moving through this book, Genesis. And so today is kind of a special day. We have spent over 2 years now working through one book of the Bible. This book has 50 chapters. And so today we move through the very last chapter, chapter 50, verses 1 through 26. And so this book, again, I would argue is one of the most important books in all of Torah because it kind of sets up the whole narrative of what it looks like to be an Israelite, first off, how to find hope in the middle of brokenness, and then how to live that hope and hold one's identity. Those are like the central elements to what it meant to be a Jew. And so for Judaism, this is like a pillar. And so again, most people are going to spend maybe like a month or two on this book, doing a different series, or maybe even 3 months is like considered a long time. The intention behind taking 2 years is because I wanted to show everyone that watches this, and then potentially more people in the future watching this series. I want you to understand, again, this is how we should approach every element of literature, specifically the Bible, right? But this is how we should approach it. We should ask higher level thinking questions, right? We should ask questions of who wrote the piece, who was the audience, what was the time period, do I understand the language or not? Because when we do that deep study, we actually honor the piece, right? I would argue it's a disservice. It's actually very dishonorable to the author and the people it was intended for when I simply look at a piece from a 21st century perspective, right? A non-Jewish 21st century perspective. And so doing this, I think we have in a very, and again, we're not Jews, right? But we have done our best to honor the tradition, to look over all the different rabbinical interpretations we could, to try our best to understand the language and these interesting intricacies and little shifts in language that mean everything to a text. I think we have honored this text. And so today we celebrate. Right? We celebrate by finishing up the book of Genesis. And so as a reminder, last time I'm going to tell you this about Genesis, not a history book. It was written for the very purpose of holding Israel and their identity together in the middle of Babylonian captivity, 587 BC. That was the entire point. It was not to write a perfect, cemented, solid history, accurate history. That was never the intention. That's not why they wrote. They didn't write history books then. They wrote narratives. They gave warnings in order to preserve their community and avoid assimilation. That is the entire point. So again, questions of is Abraham, is Adam and Eve, is Noah, are these all real, true stories or not? Not even the point. Rabbis were not asking that question. They were asking a very simple one. They were saying, how do we hold on to what it means to be a Jew? And here's what it looks like, right? In the story of Adam and Eve, how do we allow wisdom and knowledge to walk together, right? That was the point. Nothing about whether it was an apple or some other fruit, whether she got an actual rib or was half of Adam or whatever, literal days or not. Never the point, friends. It was something so much bigger. How do we walk with wisdom when we are acquiring so much knowledge? That is something today we can really use, right? That is an interesting wisdom piece that we can actually chew today and literally use and apply, right? And so that's the point of the book of Genesis. That was always the point. It was Torah written response to the fears of assimilation. And so no wonder every time Torah is brought out, there's a celebration. And so I challenge you, every time you read, whether it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, always ask the deeper question of where do I find Israel in this piece? And if you ask that higher end question, that critical thinking question, it's always going to lead you to some really profound places. And I would even argue when you consider the New Testament, do the same. And you are going to find some incredible, incredible insights that you would have missed had you not. And that's what we've been doing at Ethos. So today, chapter 51 through 26. So we start again, a reminder. The story of Joseph here toward the end of the book of Genesis was never about just some cute, interesting story about a kid with a colorful coat. It is the story of Israel. It is the story of Israel. And so Israel must walk Joseph's path through the desert to complete the restoration process. The restoration process is about to end here, which really is kind of a beginning, right? Once the father and son are united, their nation will finally celebrate. The message was and will continue to be our Jewish dominant theme, our one song. So let's read it. Here we go, 1 through 26. Joseph fell on his father's face, and he wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were completed for him, for so are the days of embalming completed, and the Egyptians wept over him for 70 days. When the days of his weeping had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, speak now in Israel's ears, saying, My father adjourned me, saying, Behold, I am going to die in my grave, which I dug myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. So now please let me go upon and bury my father and return. Pharaoh said, Go up, bury your father as he adjourned you. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and all Pharaoh's servants and elders of his house and all the elders of the land of Egypt went with him. That's a pretty big statement, right? We'll get into it. And Joseph's entire household and all of his brothers and his father's household, only their young children and their flocks and the cattle did they leave in the land of Goshen. 9 through 12. And chariots and horsemen also went up with him, and the camp was very numerous. Sounds like it, right? And they came to the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, which is on the other side of the Jordan. And there they conducted a very great and impressive eulogy, and he made for his father a mourning of 7 days. The Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, and they said, This is an intense mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore they named it Abel Mizraim, Egypt mourns, which is on the other side of the Jordan. And his sons did to him just as he had commanded them. And his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and they buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which field Abraham had bought for burial property for Ephraim the Hittite before Mamre. And Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. And Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, and they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and return to us all the evil that we did to him. So they commanded messengers to go to Joseph and say, Your father commanded us before his death, saying, So shall you say to Joseph, Please forgive now your brothers' transgressions and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also went and fell before him, and they said, Behold, we are your slaves. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I instead of God? Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good, in order to bring about what is at present to keep a great populace alive. So now do not fear. I will sustain you and your small children. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw children of a third generation born to Ephraim. Also the sons of Machir and the sons of Manasseh were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I am going to die. God will surely remember you and take you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out from here. And Joseph died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him, and he was placed into the coffin in Egypt. The end, right? But let me show you something fascinating. One of my favorite authors, this is what he says about this moment, because it's the end, right? But for a Jewish person reading this, please understand, it's not how we typically would read a book. There's something even bigger here. So I want you to understand this. So listen to what he says here. I love this quote. When we come to what we consider the end of a book of the Bible, we are wise to adjust our modern Western understanding of the word end. We are better to understand biblical texts as having reached a goal rather than being finished or ended. The last chapter of Genesis is no different. While it reaches its climax with the death and embalming of both Jacob and Joseph, it retains a strong sense of comfort and hope for the future. Isn't that beautiful? This is the point, really, right? These stories, again, were never meant in order to dictate literal historical facts. The point always, right? Whether you're reading about Daniel in the lion's den in Babylon, whether you're reading about Moses in Egypt, Joseph in Egypt, Noah in the flood, it's always to offer hope and comfort, right? This was the bigger picture. So it's not about an end, it's about a beautiful goal being found, met, and then a continuation of life. That's the beautiful idea. So let's delve in. I'm just going to go through a bunch of really interesting points that I found, and then we'll do what we always do and we'll apply. So number one, notice this. A lot in verses 1 through 4. Joseph fell on his father's face. That sounds kind of weird, right? He fell on his face. In Jacob's final moment, the promise God had made to him, if you remember in Genesis 46:4, that promise, I will go with you into Egypt. I'll also surely bring you up, and Joseph shall put his hand upon your eyes. This is that moment where it's fulfilled. And so anyone reading this, if you are a Jewish person, you're saying, yes, the fulfillment of this has happened, which is also going to remind me that other fulfillments are going to happen at the end too. This chapter, you're going to see the goals, the fulfillments of things promised will be met. That's the idea. And we continue. Here we go. Verse 2. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. So this is an interesting verse. Most people don't know this, but if you weren't Jewish, you would pass this by. You'd say, well, yeah, of course, embalm. If you're a Jew, this is deeply, deeply problematic. It's funny, when I look through all these different rabbinical interpretations, they spend pages and pages and pages on this. Because the question, of course, is, if you're Jewish, you don't go through an Egyptian embalming process. You don't. This would have been really troubling. This would have been pagan. Joseph has his father embalmed? Does a pagan thing? Notice this. I looked this up for you. This is what literally what the Egyptians would do in the embalming process. Watch this. First, with a crooked iron instrument, they extracted the brain through the nostrils, right? Which they got out partly by this means and partly by the infusion of medicines. When with a sharp Ethiopian stone, they cut about the flank and hence took out the bowels, and they cleansed, they washed with palm wine, a wine of dates. And after that again, with odors bruised, then they filled the bowels or hollow place out of which they were taken with pure myrrh, beaten, and with cassia and odors, frankincense exerted, and sewed them up. So they removed everything, put a bunch of incense and things to make it smell better, sewed it up, took out the brain, right? This is a lot of interesting stuff. And then with hiding it, covering it for 70 days, and more than they might not season it. For 70 days being ended, they wash the corpse, wrap the body in bands of fine linen, besmearing it with gum, which gum the Egyptians generally use as glue. So this is where, again, you get the mummy thing. Right? So this is what the embalming process was, according to Herodotus, this Greek historian. This is what they would have done. So did Joseph do this to his father? Well, here's what one probably the most famous rabbinical response to it is. So, how do the Jews deal with this? Right? Did Joseph actually do this pagan thing? Well, according to them, no. Here's the counter from a rabbinical interpretation that looks kind of deep at the Hebrew word. So, most Jewish rabbis read this not as like an actual embalming, but the idea that Jacob is moving into the next thing. So, notice what this says here. It is therefore likely that Joseph oversaw the embalming process and had the idolatrous elements removed from the practice as it is applied to Jacob. So Rashbam, another very famous rabbi during the era of Babylonian captivity, explains that Mesham compares this text with that of the Songs of Solomon. So the word here is similar to what you'd find in 2:13 of Song of Solomon. It says the same root word, kanat, is translated in the bosom. So this means that the fig tree is about to give forth fruit when you use it in the Song of Solomon. So really there's this really interesting correlation, according to them, that Jacob, while dead to this world, is about to blossom in the next thing that comes. That's the idea. So the word doesn't even mean embalming like we think it does. And when you look at the Hebrew, it actually meant that he is being prepared for whatever the next thing is. And again, if you're Jewish, you know they don't know, right? They admit they don't know, but it's a great mystery. So whatever the mystery is, whatever happens after death, according to the Hebrews, he's ready for the thing. Right? That's the idea. We prepared his body and his soul is ready for whatever the thing is that comes next. That's the idea here. And so in captivity, understand this, they grew, they matured, and when they leave, they are wiser, right? They're more mature, they are ripe, and they are ready for the future. This is where you see Israel again. Right? After being beaten, broken in the middle of captivity, there for years and years and years. The idea for them is when they finally get to pass into the promised land, right? A very real, literal place, when they finally get to be free, hopefully they are wiser. Hopefully there's some ripe fruit. Right? That's the deeper idea here. And again, funny, we've only gone through a couple verses, a couple phrases, but again, it's so rich. This ending, which is not really an ending, right? So good. And 40 days were completed. Now, again, you know this, words, phrases, numbering, all has a lot of interesting connotations to it. So again, 40, it's interesting here. If you, again, weren't Jewish, you'd skip by this. But Jews, again, would probably be scratching their head. This wouldn't have made sense. Why? Because Jews, again, would have said 40 days 40 days were completed. Is this an Egyptian thing or a Hebrew thing? Well, for an Israelite, they're saying it's a Hebrew thing. 40 days is deeply, deeply important. Notice this. I just wrote a couple, and there's plenty more. But notice this. 40 days, really, really important. 40 days and nights it rains in the flood, right? 40 days. 40 days Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, right? 40 days and nights. 40 days between Jesus' resurrection and ascension, right? 40 days. What you may not know, and what most Jews would immediately make a connection to, is after a woman gives birth to a child, there is a rest period of how many days? Yeah, 40 days. Because after a difficult experience, the pain, right? There's blood. It's a mess. It's just a mess, right? After that difficult, the grind, the pushing, the screaming, right? A new birth experience. After that comes a newborn, this beautiful new life. 40 days. So when you read 40 days, there's so much beauty there. You remember the captivity, but you know there's new life right around the corner. When you were Jewish and you read that phrase, 40 days completed, right? That's an immediate moment for Israel to say, new life is about to happen. Even though we're toward the end of this story, look out, right? Exodus is coming, right? New life, new birth, new experience, newness is coming, new life. So if 40 meant that, what does 70 mean? Because the Egyptians wept over him for 70 days. Why 70? Well, 70, notice this. Rabbi Yaakov Brown, he says this: the 70 full days of mourning are also significant. 70 being a multiple of 2 of the Hebrew numbers of fullness, fruitfulness, and completion, 10 times 7. It is also the number representing the nations. Yeah, right. You have the 10, these different nations, national elements, all connected, and you add those up, 70. In essence, the 70 days foreshadow the 7-day mourning period recorded in verse 10. 7 days multiplied by intense, full 10 days of mourning. Makes sense, right? When you are a Jew, all of these numbers, all this has some meaning to you. And so it just keeps adding. And what really is going on here is there's the promise of fullness, and then it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger. Yeah, these are layers, and this is what typically you would find with Jewish writing. They love to use these symbolic moments where it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until the end, bam, celebration, new life. The baby's here. We have crossed the Jordan. We are in the promised land. We left Egypt, right? That's the idea. It builds, builds, builds. We'll keep going. Verse 4. When the days of his weeping had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household. Now, this is kind of interesting. Joseph speaks. Joseph is asking Pharaoh's officials to speak for him, with basically coming to him and saying, look, we want you to speak for us. Because here's the thing. If you read Esther 4:2, you know this. Persian kings, Egyptian kings, you cannot appear before them at a funeral. Interesting, right? They knew this. You couldn't appear before them. So Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household because Pharaoh couldn't be there, right? If now I found favor in your eyes, speak now in Pharaoh's ears, saying. So he has to tell them, go tell Pharaoh this because I can't approach him because I am stained with death at this moment. Kind of an interesting little side note. That's why this would have been there, and that's why if you were Jewish or an ancient person during that time, it wouldn't have seemed odd at all. Why didn't he approach Pharaoh himself? Because he can't be connecting himself with death, right? And this is something that Jewish individuals would also feel about their kings, right? We don't want to bring death to the king. Yeah. All right. So 5 verse 6. Notice this. My father adjured me, saying, behold, I am going to die in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. So now please let me go up and bury my father. So he's going to ask this of Pharaoh. Pharaoh says to his messengers, go up, bury your father as he has adjourned you. So basically, Pharaoh here, he respects, he shows honor in this decision. And that's kind of cool. And again, if you were a Jewish person or anyone during that time, that would have been kind of a shocker, right? Pharaoh, the God on earth, is allowing that, and he's sending everyone he knows. Again, it's more about the story than it is about literalism. And even that's why 5 through 8, when you look at these verses, the processional language, all of the elders of the land with Pharaoh, it's basically 70% of Egypt goes with Joseph. If I'm going to be honest, probably not literal there, right? If that were so, you would find that in all of these different Egyptian documents. You would see the stories of that, but you just don't see that, right? Because more than likely, not literal, but the writers want you to know this was a big deal, and Pharaoh honors Joseph. That's the takeaway here. Whether it happened or not, Pharaoh honors Joseph. Verses 5 through 8. So now we move to 9, 10. Notice in 10, they came to the threshing floor of the thorn bushes. Now this is new, which is on the other side of the Jordan. So notice this other side of the Jordan, over and over again, we have these moments where you cross the Jordan to the promised land. Jesus, miracle in the Jordan. Elijah, the Jordan River, over and over again. This is a reference. Miraculous things happen at the Jordan, specifically when you cross it, right? This is about new beginnings, crossing the Jordan. And this is why you'll see in a lot of different nomadic tribes, crossing the river always has like this interesting metaphorical twist to it. You're doing something big. Life is about to shift. New beginnings are about to be found. A new place to reside, new home will be experienced. So when you hear Jordan, crossing the Jordan, that's a big deal, right? And so the threshing floor, they conduct the eulogy. They make their father mourning for 7 days. The Canaanites and inhabitants of the land saw the mourning at the threshing floor on the thorn bushes. And they said, this is an intense mourning of the Egyptians. So again, the threshing floor is where you're basically going to get your wheat, right? And all the other stuff kind of goes to the side, but it's thorny. So there's, again, an interesting metaphor here. Even though we are gaining all of our harvest, and that's a celebration moment, thorns are among us, right? We're doing it in the middle of something where there's thorns. So the idea, new life is about to take place, but in the middle of it, there is mourning, right? It's so beautiful, and yet there's some sadness. And I think all of us have experienced those moments too, right? Yes, but right? You're about to step into the new job, but man, you're leaving behind people you love, right? There are people that you just deeply love and love to work with, and maybe you love the space you were in, but you're stepping into the new thing, and it's a celebration, but there's also loss, and it hurts. It's like a thorn. Do you understand the interesting metaphor here? Also, notice this. This is the first time that you would notice, apart from the story of Job, the idea of sitting Shiva. So one writer says this, Jewish writer, Goren Hafaf literally means the field of threshing floor of thorns. According to Jewish tradition, it was common practice at the time to make a hedge of thorns around the threshing floor. Whenever someone lost someone, you would do this in honor of them, to say, we celebrate the life that was lived, and yet it hurts us to leave them, right? There's pain. It's a form of the passage that Talmud derives the sitting of Shiva. This is an intense 7-day period of mourning. So if you were to lose someone, if something terribly painful happened to you, people would come there and they'd sit with you. And this is where like the sackcloth and all that for Job, they'd sit with you, and they were supposed to quietly just hold you and mourn with you. So that's the idea here. Really pretty heavy, right? Again, most people skip over this. Thorns, threshing floor, sitting Shiva, much like they did with Job. Beautiful, right? A beautiful tradition. They still do this in many Jewish communities. Verse 15, notice this. Joseph's brothers saw this, that their father died, and they said, uh-oh, perhaps Joseph will hate us, and he'll return us all the evil that we did to him. This seems odd, right, at first when you read it. Why now do they begin to question Joseph? Like, why are they now saying, oh no, Dad's not here to like stop him. He's probably going to be angry with us. Why are they questioning him? He's been so loving to them. He's given everything back. Why are they questioning him now? Well, that's an interesting question. It reminded me, Rabbi Ralph Messer, he says this about Romans 8:1. The fear of the brothers is to do with their own sense of guilt and their inability to understand the kind of forgiveness that Joseph had imparted. Like so many followers of Jesus today, the brothers began to trust in condemnation rather than resting in forgiveness. Right? Rest in condemnation rather than forgiveness. I think often, whatever tradition you're from, Catholicism, Christianity, Mormonism, whatever the thing is, I think often in the 18th, 19th centuries, you had a deep lean on condemnation because it can control the masses, right? You could control people very easily with shame and guilt, with condemnation. But when someone is forgiven, right? When there's forgiveness, when nothing's being held against them, they're free. And you cannot control free people, can you? And yet the message of Jesus over and over again was, you are free indeed. Go be free, right? And so the brothers, it's interesting that they immediately lean back on condemnation rather than they're free, right? This is why Saul, right, writes, there is no longer condemnation for those in Messiah Yeshua, which is, the Jewish word for Jesus. There's no condemnation. That's the message Jesus brought over and over again. You are free. Stop leaning back on more guilt and shame. You're free. No one's holding anger. God is not angry with you. God's not holding anger, and no one's holding this against you but you. So go be free, right? Such a beautiful, beautiful message. I hope someone heard that right now and that was like freeing to you. No one is holding anything above you but you right now. Yeah. Verse 17. Notice this. When Joseph hears this, it says Joseph wept. Joseph wept. Yeah. This should remind you again, think Jesus, right? Jesus wept. And I've had many people again say, oh, well, this is Jesus is doing this because, or Joseph is doing this because it's going to point to Jesus. Well, no, the writers are looking back, right? They're wanting to show Jesus is another messianic archetype, and he's bringing a freedom, a new kind of freedom to his people. In fact, not just his people, but also their enemies, Rome. There's a new kind of freedom. And so he weeps. Why does he weep? Well, notice this. Notice this quote, Romans 8, 1-2. There is therefore now no condemnation toward those who are in Messiah Yeshua, who walk not after the flesh, but in the Spirit. For the law, the established consequences, we might say, of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua has made me free from the law, again, the consequences of sin and death. So the bigger picture here, there's no condemnation, only hope. And Joshua here, it's really interesting, he weeps because he realizes his brothers have not gotten the message yet. Why does Jesus weep? People argue all the time over this. It's simple. Why does Joseph weep? It's the same thing, because people did not understand his message. Over and over again, he's saying there's no condemnation. Be free. You can be free right now. You can live kingdom of heaven right now. Oh, but I can't. I'm so sinful. I'm bad. I'm evil. I'm this. I'm that. He says, no, stop it. You're free, right? That was Jesus' message. And because his disciples don't get it over and over again, the idea is here he weeps like Joseph weeps. Yeah, really good, right? This last chapter, I'm telling you, really good. We'll keep going. Verse 19. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I instead God? Yeah, this should remind you of these moments with Christ and the disciples. Again, so many of these. Why so similar? Again, they're looking back. So Jesus again says many things like this. Why are you afraid? Right? Why are you afraid of me? Look to God, right? This was the answer over and over again. Look to God. And when you look to God, there is no condemnation. Why are you afraid of me? That's the deeper picture. And again, really beautiful. Verse 20. Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good in order to bring about what is at present to keep a great populace alive. Did the divine literally send a famine and all these things? Well, no. I'm just going to say it. No. Right? But used these things in order that the people can grow, right? Consequences happen. What do we do with them? We can either navigate it, get through it, and become more resilient, or we can let it defeat us. And this is Israel's way of saying we choose to be resilient. We choose to navigate it, to build strength, to become a better people from it. That's what this is saying. And that's exactly the cross message as well. Though you intended death, Rome, right? Pharisees, the religious and political structure of the day in Judaism during the first century, though you intended this to bring death, the cross, right? It actually has brought life, right? This is so, so good. The cross was supposed to be a terrible instrument that was going to hurt people, all of these things. Jesus says, no. The disciples say, no, it's shifted it completely. What was meant to hurt has now brought people together. Beautiful stuff. Verse 21. So now do not fear. I will sustain you and your small children. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So Joseph shows yet again why his life and character are such like a beautiful type of foreshadowing of Messiah, right? Of messianic archetype. And so here Joseph, in spite of the fact that he has every right to like hold a grudge, he acts gracious and loving. That's the idea. And so the word here, Messiah, interesting word. It's a descriptive word that means like breath, breath that brings life, which is again what this does. When you choose to forgive, not hold grudges, those kind of things, you bring life. Cool. 22, 23. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Now, again, most of us skip this over, but why 110? Because if you're Hebrew, you'd hear 120. This is a great shift for anyone reading this. It would be like, wait, you're missing 10 years. Someone needs to fix that, right? 110? Why 110? Hebraic symbolism is always 120. Why 110? Well, here's why. And this is really fascinating to me because I had to dig for this. I asked that same question, why 110? When you dig for it, it actually makes sense because Egypt, they felt a full life, one that had like mastered all of the different things in life, that had become like extremely wise. 110. So notice this. One historian writes this: the age 110 years appears in Egyptian sources as the ideal lifespan. There is perhaps a sign to the Egyptians of the blessing of Hashem upon Joseph and Israel. So 110, why 110, not 120? It's a reference that even the Egyptians would say Joseph lived a full life. He had experienced the fullness of wisdom. That is a cool thing to throw in there, isn't there? Yeah, again, why all the numbers, all these things? They were very intentional with numbers and words and symbolism. People will often say to me, Tony, I feel like you're just trying to dig too deep. The truth is, this is how they wrote. We have to dig deep in order to understand why this. Because again, if you're Jewish, 110 would have been very odd for you, especially knowing Egyptian culture. But when you understand it, there's a real beauty to it. Verses 24 through 26. Notice 24. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm going to die. God will surely remember you and take you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So essentially, I brought you here to Egypt, to our neighbors, and we've been living here, but this is not our land, right? We've been promised a bigger land. We've been promised this beautiful promised land, and we're not there yet. God is not done yet. That's the idea. And so this word, this phrase here, pakod, yipadkod, that's kind of how you'd pronounce it. This is a reference to God doing some kind of beautiful action. And the word means remember, redeem. So when you remember, you are redeeming the whole thing. So this phrase is not used lightly. It's very rare. And so you'll see Moses, Joshua, Joseph, Noah, Daniel, Jesus, they are given this phrase. And so the ancients, for them, these individuals, these messianic archetypes, they redeem Israel. And they redeem Israel by what? By remembering, reminding their people of their story. What did Jesus do? Reminded his people of their story. They had forgotten why the laws were there in the first place. He reminded them of their story. Joseph reminds them of the story. Joshua reminds them of the story. Moses reminds them of their story. In the middle of captivity, what will redeem you? Remembering your story. I know, so good. 25. Joseph adjourned the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of there. So again, this is a fact. None other than Moses himself is going to carry the bones of Joseph out of Egypt. We know that Egypt 13:19. Look it up later. You'll see. I mean, it's an interesting point here. Moses is going to draw out. He's going to take these bones out of Egypt. Yeah, that's in the story. Most people miss it in the Egyptian narrative, but Moses is very important. Jews are looking for this. They know the promise here in Genesis. They're looking for Moses to carry those bones of Joseph out of Egypt. And so that happens, the draw out. And again, why this? There's metaphor. There's a lot of symbolism. We carry Joseph. We carry our story with us everywhere we go. Our ancestors, we carry them on our backs. So good. Lastly, notice this. And Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him, and he was placed into the coffin. Again, it ends in a really, really beautiful way. Joseph lives a full life according to both Jews and Gentiles, right? His bones are left in Egypt. His physical remains are going to be a symbol of Israel's coming deliverance, right? They're not done yet. It's a reminder that we're not here forever, right? Someday we will, watch me now, we will resurrect the bones and we will leave Egypt. We will resurrect the bones, right? The stone is going to be rolled away. Like Daniel, like Jesus, we're going to pull out the body, we're going to move the bones, and we're going to take it somewhere else. That is an image. If you're an Israelite, it's a beautiful one. We bring it to the promised land with us. We carry those messianic archetype, those voices, those warnings, those messages. We carry that on our backs. We resurrect it at the time when we need it most. And it is the thing that's going to sustain us as we get out of Egypt and into promised land. I hope you rewind what I just said over and over again until you finally hear what I said. We resurrect those stories, those warnings, those letters, those messages. We resurrect them and we carry them on our way to the promised land. That message at the end of Genesis is one that I've never heard at a church before. I've never heard a pastor share it before. And when I picked it up, as I delved into this from a Jewish perspective, it like broke me. And it actually caused everything to come together. All of the different narratives, all the different messianic archetype voices, all of it made sense to me then. It brings it all together. It becomes one unified voice, one unified message. We resurrect, we bring it up. Love wins. Hope can be held on to because at some point we will carry those voices with us to freedom. This was good. This was really good. So how do we take it home? There were so many directions. I probably did this like 5 or 6 times. I just kept thinking, well, I want them to do this, and I want to think about this and this and this. I decided on something simple, right? How do we find hope? Because that's the deeper message, the lessons from Genesis. How do we find hope in the middle of captivity, brokenness? How do we find hope? And so what Genesis has taught me, number one, is take time, pause, observe, right? When you are in the middle of the thing, whatever the thing is, ask yourself, what's real? What's good? Our emotions get in the way so many times. And so ask yourself, what is the most important thing right now? Right? What is, I have to make this big decision. What are the things that should actually be important that I should sift through first when I make this decision? Right? Let that be a navigator for you, much like it was for Israel. Number 2, remember your story. This is the point, right? Remember your story. This is what Israel does best, right? This is the reason Torah, the whole point of it. Remember your story. Remember your identity. What lessons have you learned that are going to inform you for this next phase of your life? What things can you bring with you now that you can pull up from the past that you can say, I did it this way in the past. I learned from it. This new phase, I'm going to do it this way. In retirement, I'm going to do this thing differently now. I've learned all this different wisdom. I'm going to live these next 20 years this way, whatever it is. Or maybe you moved from college. Now you're going to step into the new thing. What lessons did you learn there that that can help you navigate in a new, fuller way? That is real beauty. And then lastly, live in community. I think this is really difficult for a lot of people, especially when you've like stepped away from a specific tribe or church. Community, we were not intended to just be islands, right? Even though there are moments in our lives where we find some solace in individuality and we want to be alone, but coming back to some form of community, it's really beautiful, right? Israel did this. And everything they did, everything was connected to community. Community brought a sense of belonging and hope, right? And so find people who have similar values, people that you can have discussions with. Maybe you can disagree with them. Maybe they challenge you to be better, whatever it is. Find community wherever you can find it, and then learn to embrace that community when you find it. And sometimes life, this happens at different phases in your life with different communities, but learn to enjoy those and embrace them when you find them. Everyone, I hope you enjoy this one. Ethos-church.org/donate. Please consider donating. We are a tax-deductible organization. We're getting toward the end of the year here. Send those in, especially when you want to send those tax write-offs, right? This is the place to do it. Some of you have asked, what's next? Here's what we're doing for December. We're going to do a couple more of these, just 2 of them. We're going to do 2 different sermon kind of concepts on hope, and we're going to focus it on the narrative of the scene with the birth scene with Jesus, right? We're going to look at that. We're going to ask difficult, big questions of it. And then, of course, we're going to ask, what is the actual meaning here that they had when they told the stories of this beautiful moment where the birth of Jesus happens, and there's camels, and there's myrrh and incense and gold and wise men and shepherds and angels. What's the point of it? We're going to look at that this month in 2 installments called Hope. So I hope you're ready for that. I hope you're ready. And as always, hit that subscribe button, share it with others. I am excited about sharing this series now. I'm going to begin promoting this a lot because this is something I would argue is really valuable. I've had a couple pastors text me in the last couple weeks and said, hey, I've begun your series. And I started with the first one, and I'm going to start using this for our series. And some of them have admitted, I'm probably not going to say some of these things, but I really found it valuable, some of the interesting details you brought up. And so thank you for watching. This has been gold. What a privilege. What an honor to walk with you in this book. Everyone, thank you. I love you. And let's keep this moving. Let's delve into hope in the next couple of weeks. Everyone, take care. Have a great week. See you soon.